I believe that for many of us, that's what happens when it comes to being able to exercise our freedom to be able to worship. The only time that we begin to get a little worried or bothered about it is when somebody tells us we can't do it, or we can't do it as easily as we would like to. Anybody remember that funny little thing that happened a few years ago? Yeah, that COVID thing, right? Think about that. Like hundreds and hundreds of years of this stuff going on, and we're 250. I mean, it's like we're a teenager, right? I mean, that's compared to the rest of the world, and sometimes that's how we act, is a little bit like an impetuous teenager, and that's okay. That's part of that growth and development in who we are, but I am so thankful that one of the things that we have been afforded through the grace of God, and I truly believe it is by the grace of God that we have been afforded this, is that we get the opportunity to gather on a Sunday like this, or really any day of the week that we choose. We can come together in a public way and we can worship God. In fact, if we wanted to do this down at the local park, we could do it. If we wanted to do it out in the parking lot so that people passing by could hear, we could do that because we have the freedom to be able to worship. And that freedom is an incredible blessing from God, but it is also a challenge. And here's why I say that. Things that become routine to us often become overlooked. Things that become routine to us often become overlooked. Here's how I can explain that to you. Did anybody enjoy having air conditioning in their house this week? Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that. Right? My brother-in-law, Casey, and his wife, Bree, and their family, BJ, and Charlie, and Riley, they, at their house this week, had something go wrong with their air conditioning. Now, they're in the middle of Indiana, and you may say, well, that's so much cooler and everything than here. It was actually about 8 degrees hotter there, with higher humidity. In the Midwest, we get the same humidity, just instead of drawing the moisture from all of the water around, they're drawing it from all the plants out in the fields, okay? Like it's giving off all that humidity and everything that's there. And on top of it, our little niece, Charlie, had surgery to have her tonsils and her adenoids removed. And so they were bringing her home from the hospital, and she did not especially like waking up from the anesthesia. You ever have a little one that kind of struggled with that a little bit and all? And so at the time they needed to bring her back home, it was about 80 degrees in their house. Yes, they're like, nope. And so Bree's grandma lives right there. So they hung out at grandma's house because it was cool. They were used to just being able to go into their house, and when you walk into your house, it's nice and cool, and the humidity's knocked down and all that kind of stuff, because if it works correctly, we don't pay attention to it. It's only when it's broken that we begin to recognize that something is wrong or missing. And I believe that for many of us, that's what happens when it comes to being able to exercise our freedom to be able to worship. The only time that we begin to get a little worried or bothered about it is when somebody tells us we can't do it, or we can't do it as easily as we would like to. Anybody remember that funny little thing that happened a few years ago? Yeah, that COVID thing, right? He started saying, hey, this is when you can, and this is when you can't, and this is how many people can show up, and this is what you have to wear, and this is how far apart you have to sit, and all that kind of stuff and everything, you know. All of a sudden in that moment, we began on a very small scale to understand what people all around our world have experienced for generations, which is where groups have said, you are not allowed to worship the way that you want. You're not allowed to worship in the place that you want, or at the time that you want, or with the amount of people that you want. I had friends of mine, I shared this before, but they were missionaries in the eastern part of the world. And There were people that were talking about how excited they were that communist China was beginning to allow Christian groups to come in and to do things again. And they were like, aren't you excited that the church is going to be able to worship openly and freely? And their response was, no, it is our greatest fear. They said the reason it was their greatest fear is because when it costs something to worship God, you were serious about it. But if it becomes easy, they said, is it going to become just like Christianity in America? Now, these were Americans that were saying it. You understand that, right? It's so easy. It's easy to say, yeah, I'm a Christian. It's easy to say, yeah, I go to that church. It's easy to say, I believe in God. But are we living out the life that He has called us to live? Or are we still in bondage? Are we still enslaved to fear? Are we still enslaved to doubt? Are we still enslaved to all those things that wants to bind us instead of realizing that we have incredible true freedom in Christ? I'm going to be reading today in the book of John. John is this incredible gospel writer because John writes everything from a very emotional, relational place. That's who he was. That's how God created him. And so he writes from that perspective. And in John chapter 8, we find all these amazing things happening. The first thing that happens in John 8 is that Jesus comes in and there is this woman brought before him and thrown down in the dirt. And they say, look, she's been caught in adultery. And so the law says we should stone her. And so this group of men gather around and they're grabbing stones, and all of a sudden, Jesus just kneels down and starts writing in the dirt. Really smart people who are a lot smarter than me, have tried to come up with the things that maybe he was writing. I don't know what it was. Some people say he was writing the names of the men that she had been unfaithful with, and maybe some of those men were gathered in the circle around. Some people have said maybe he was writing down the sins of the people that were gathered in the circle because he knew. Some people say maybe he was simply writing out the law so that way they would recognize that he knew the law and that they had come short of fulfilling the law. It really doesn't matter what he wrote. What he was writing was so convicting to them, they started dropping their stones and walking away. And at the end of it all, he looks at the woman and says, who's here left to accuse you? She's like, nobody. He doesn't just say, go, you're off scot-free. What he says is, stop it. Like, you don't have to live in bondage to that kind of life. I offer you something different. After that interaction, what happens is he begins to then teach the people that are gathered around. He says, look, I am the light of the world. I am the hope. I am the place that you can find the possibility for what is to come. And anytime Jesus does that, people begin to try to trip him up and they try to create issues and all that kind of stuff. And so finally, Jesus, down in verse 30, begins to kind of give this key instruction. He says, look, if you continue in my word, you really are my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We're going to come back to that. It's important. We are descendants of Abraham, they answered him, and we have never been enslaved to anyone. How can you say you will become free? Now, let me give you a little parentheses here real quick, right? Because any of you that have studied the Bible at all, you know that all throughout the Old Testament, how many times were God's people enslaved to somebody else? Like over and over and over and over. We got Babylonians that they're messed up with, right? We've got all the ites that are throughout everything, right? You know, we got all the different groups that are there, and they have seen this kind of stuff taking place over and over and over again. And yet they're like, hey, look, we've never been enslaved to anybody else, because in their mind, because they were chosen by God, it doesn't matter what was happening. They really weren't slaves to those people. They were just put in an unjust situation. Does that sound anything like the church in America today? Maybe just a little bit. Truly, I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave of sin. A slave does not remain in the household forever, but a son does remain forever. So if the Son sets you free, you really will be free. I know you are descendants of Abraham, but you are trying to kill me because my word has no place among you. I speak what I have seen in the presence of the Father, so then you do what you have heard from your father. He says, look, you all have been doing everything that you can to try to catch me, try to trip me up, because you don't like what I'm saying. But yet you say we have the same Father. How can we have the same Father when my Father has sent me to do this work? How can you possibly be aligned with what the Father is saying when you're trying to get rid of what the Father is doing?